All right, so I want to officially welcome you to our program this evening. My name is Carol Bailey White, and I'm the president of Duval Audubon Society, and thank you all so much for being here. Basically, we're going to go ahead and get started. We ask you to keep your audio on mute during the presentation, unless you're one of the speakers, of course. And if you do have any questions, just post your questions in the chat window, and that way we will get to them kind of at the end of the presentation. And let me move on to my next slide, because I have a few things I want to share with you all first. So just about our chapter, and I share this information pretty much at every meeting, so I apologize if you've heard all this already, but I like to let everybody know what we're all about. So we are a chapter of the National Audubon Society, and we're a member of Audubon, Florida as well. We have about 1,200 members in Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties in Northeast Florida. We are an all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to connect people with nature. So everything that we do is basically around that central theme of trying to connect people with nature. Our philosophy is, and I know a lot of environmental organizations share this philosophy, if people aren't familiar with things, they won't care about them. If they don't care about them, they won't try to protect them. So our goal is to connect people with nature so they will care about it as much as we do. Everyone is welcome to any of our activities. And speaking of our activities, here's what we've got coming up in the next month. This Saturday at our Crosby Sanctuary Conservation Property in Orange Park, we have our open house event. And it's just an opportunity for people to come and enjoy the sanctuary, just get out and walk around. There's not any hosted walks or anything like that. It's basically just come on out and feel free to walk around the sanctuary and enjoy it, because it is a beautiful place. And this time of year, especially if it stays this cool, is a wonderful time to be there. On Saturday, October 30th, we're having a field trip at Huguenot Memorial Park. And if you'll notice, it has an asterisk next to it. And basically that just means that you do have to register in advance for this. And registration is required for all of our field trips, advanced registration on our meetup page. And the link to that is at the bottom of the screen. Let's see, Saturday, November 6th, a field trip at the Egan's Creek Greenway. That's up in Fernandina Beach. It is a lovely place. If you have never been there, I highly recommend it. And then on Sunday, November 7th, we're going to have kind of a beginning birders field trip at Palmetto Leaves Regional Park, which is kind of near where I live. So I do plan on going to that one. Our next month's virtual monthly program is Making Your Sightings Count with eBird. Our local, one of our board members and one of our local eBird reviewers, Marie Chappell, is going to present about how to just get the most out of eBird that you possibly can. And let's see, Saturday, November 20th, we're having our nature walk and work day at Crosby, and you do have to sign up in advance for that one. And then Saturday, November 27th, our next month's open house. So that's our upcoming events. I did want to mention two things that I want to make sure everybody's aware of, two areas that we're kind of supporting. On the left is, this is happening tomorrow, and it's the activation plan presentation and community feedback session that's sponsored by the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. They have been hosting lots and lots of sessions to get community input on that's the bad way to put it, on how to best activate our riverfront and take the best advantage of our beautiful St. Johns River downtown that we can. And they're going to present what they have collected and gather more community feedback tomorrow afternoon. The session is going to be, you can go in person or you can register via Zoom. And the link to register for either the in-person session or the Zoom version is at the bottom of the screen on the left. And then on the right, I wanted to make sure to mention that the Ocklawaha River, which is dammed at the Rodman Dam, has been dammed for how many years? Since the late 1960s, I believe. And there's a long story behind it, but there is a possibility, the dam is aging, and there is a possibility of now breaching the dam and letting the Ocklawaha River flow free. The reason why we care about this so much is because the Ocklawaha River is the largest tributary to the St. Johns River. It is south of here, but since our river flows north, then anything good that happens in the river upstream of us will eventually improve our water quality right here in Jacksonville. So we do support breaching the Rodman Dam, and if you are interested in doing that, and we urge you to, if you're at all interested in the water quality in the St. Johns River, the deadline for submitting your comments to the St. Johns River Water Management District is actually this Friday, October 22nd at 5 p.m. So please follow the link at the bottom, freetheocklawaha.com/action-alert to find out more and get the link to submit your survey. All right. All right, so introducing our speakers tonight for our presentation, which I'm retitling Light Pollution and Its Effects on Birds and Other Wildlife. Artificial lighting can be at night can be deadly for wildlife, including the birds that are migrating through our area right now. Our presenters will discuss the dangers of light pollution for birds and other wildlife and describe how a local initiative is working to reduce those hazards in Northeast Florida. So we have Professor Natasha Vanderhoff from Jacksonville University. She will speak first. And we also have Mike Taylor, the curator of herps, birds, and others at the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, and he'll speak after Natasha. So let me introduce Natasha. Natasha Vanderhoff, Ph.D., is an associate professor of biology and marine science at Jacksonville University. Dr. Vanderhoff got her first bird book when she was 12 and has been hooked ever since. Her core area of interest is behavioral ecology, a discipline within animal behavior that seeks to find evolutionary explanations for behavior, and her doctoral dissertation focused on the foraging and vocal behavior of American robins. Dr. Vanderhoff teaches biological diversity, ornithology, evolution, and animal behavior at Jacksonville University, and can often be found birding at JU's beautiful campus. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mike Taylor as well, just to go ahead and get all the introductions out of the way. But again, if you have any questions for either of the speakers at any point, please just post them in the chat right there. And Dr. Vanderhoff has actually posted a link to something that she will, I'm sure, discuss during her presentation. So you may want to go ahead and take a look at the chat just for that. So here's our introduction of Mike Taylor. Mike is the curator of herps, birds, and others at the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, and he's also the project lead for the Lights Out Northeast Florida initiative, which is our partnership with the zoo and our chapter, as well as St. Johns County Audubon Society. Mike has more than 35 years of experience working with captive animal collections, and he manages the reptile, amphibian, and fishes collections at the zoo, as well as all of the zoo's avian residents. So thanks to you both for presenting this evening. And without further ado, I think I will just turn it over to Dr. Vanderhoff. And please go ahead. Let me stop my share so you can share your screen when you're ready.
So can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you guys for having me. I hope I do this topic justice. As I was looking into it, I thought, man, you could have a whole semester's worth of information on this topic. It's very interesting, and I hope I can get you guys hooked on it. Any of the articles that I mentioned tonight, if you all are interested in copies of those articles, I can send them to Carol or get them to you in some way. So if you're interested in any of this information, just let me know. I did post a link in the chat section. This is a really cool tool. You can go to it and you can type in any location that you're interested in, and it'll tell you about light intensity levels in that area. So I did Jacksonville, of course, since we're in Jacksonville. And the darker the red, basically the greater the light intensity. So pretty much everywhere here in Jacksonville, we are under the effects of artificial light. If you want to go someplace nearby, it looks like you got to go out in the middle of the Okefenokee swamp. And even there still is some residual light pollution. It's just not as intense. So it's really sad. I'm going to give you guys lots of figures from papers, and I'm going to kind of walk you through them. But most of the world's population, unfortunately, lives underneath some type of artificial light pollution. In Europe and the United States, greater than 99% of the populations live underneath light pollution. And so here, this is just by population. So I've got an arrow next to where the United States is, so you guys can check it out here. But the white and the red, these are high intensity light. So most Americans, almost 80% of the US population lives underneath light. And Carol and I were talking before, about seeing the Milky Way. Most people probably in the US have never seen it because of all the light pollution. This next figure, it's just showing by area. So the US, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess it's a big country, so there are still some places that are dark. You've got to go out west or to Alaska. Most of Europe, as you can see up here at top, most of the area of European countries is covered by artificial light. Of course, down here at the bottom, right, large countries like Russia, Canada, Australia, where they don't have a lot of population centers, these areas are dark. But most of the world, unfortunately, lives underneath artificial light. So what are sources of artificial light pollution? Street lights, they're a big culprit. There are different types of street lights. Not all street lights are created equal. You might have seen a graphic very similar to this one before. And basically, the lights that are the worst are the ones that give off light not just below, but above and around and everywhere. So the more you can focus that light downward, the better it is. But it's not necessarily better for some animals, and we'll see that. Any types of signs, billboards, flashing lights, advertisements, all of this stuff is a source of artificial light pollution. And this, of course, is Times Square, which I think it's always daylight in Times Square. And then buildings. So this is our skyline, and buildings at night in the city core give off quite a bit of light, as well as residential houses also have light as well. It's not just the big skyscrapers downtown. They actually have symposiums now to discuss the effects of light pollution. And this is a really cool graphic and it's called Blinded by the Light Symposium from last year, where they examined all the different effects of light pollution. And kind of what this graphic summarizes are causes of light pollution, so what we just discussed, and how it affects all sorts of different animals. And I will focus primarily on birds, but I'm going to mention a few other animals as well. And it happens at all different levels. And this is the really kind of important thing to understand. It can start at the lowest level of organisms, at their molecules. By changing the light, you can actually turn genes on and off in different ways. It can have consequences for hormones, which can have consequences for behavior. If behavior changes, populations of animals can change. This can change the community. This can change the ecosystem. So these effects, it's not just individual organisms that are affected, but it's the larger, wider community that can be affected. I'm going to go through several studies with you. First, I'm going to talk about the effect on insects, because insects, I'm sure you all have heard the bad news. I feel whenever we talk about animals, it's always about death, doom, and destruction, but many of you all have probably heard about the great insect apocalypse that we're currently under. Insects are declining at a great rate, and light pollution, of course, is leading to some of their decline. This is a great figure from a recent paper by Owens and colleagues, and it talks about the effects of light pollution. And when we think about light pollution, we might be thinking about kind of direct effects of light pollution, but you also have the diffuse effects of light pollution as well. So some of the direct effects, well, it can mess with signaling. So think about lightning bugs, right? If there's a lot of light around, that signal that they use for mating, they aren't going to be able to get it across. And this obviously will have reproductive consequences. It can act as a trap for different organisms. So moths moving towards the light, it's not good for them. It's great for the bats that might be able to find the food a little bit better. Also, some animals will, or insects will avoid light altogether, but many others will fall underneath the trap and become food for other organisms. One thing that direct light can do is it can polarize different surfaces. And for many insects that oviposit on water, when this surface becomes highly polarized because of the light, they think there's water there, and so they try to oviposit. And if you're ovipositing on concrete, right, you're obviously not going to have successful reproduction. Over here, talking about some of the diffuse effects of light. Long-term studies in crickets have shown that this actually changes their overall physiology and kind of lifetime reproductive effects. We've got a picture here of a little dung beetle. Dung beetles, to navigate, they can often use the star compass, and if there's light, that's going to mess with how they move around and navigate. There have been lots of studies looking at pollination, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, but also different pests and how they attack different plants. So light can affect insects in multiple ways. And of course, insects are the base of the food web for a lot of other organisms. So if it affects those things, it's going to affect everything higher up. Moths are important pollinators at night. Artificial light has been shown to reduce visitations to flowers by 62%. So if they aren't doing the pollinating that they're supposed to, then this is cutting down on the reproductive effort of the plants. Caterpillars. So this was a really cool study, and this was done in England. So we're going to be talking about hedgerows. And what they did is they looked at streets that had lights, and then they did another set of streets that didn't have any lights. And they didn't measure moth diversity, but they looked at caterpillars. And they looked and counted how many they were finding in the hedgerows in areas where there's light. And they also looked in areas where there was no light, both in the hedgerow and then down in the grassy area as well. So here's a figure from their paper, and it looks kind of complicated. But on this side, they're looking at hedgerows, and on this side, they're looking at caterpillars in grassy areas. So this is LED light, and then these are sodium light bulbs here. And as you can tell, more on transects, basically all these bars are pointing out that there are fewer insects available where there are lights as compared to areas where there are no lights. So this greatly reduces caterpillar abundance. And I think it was by as much as 52%. But one of the kind of interesting findings that they also showed is that under LED light, so under this LED light, they might be getting fewer caterpillars, but the caterpillars they were getting were much fatter, showing that the light in some way is altering their development and their physiology. So it's not only plays a role in changing the numbers of individuals that you see, but also the size of those individuals. Switching gears to an animal that we are all familiar with here in Jacksonville, sea turtles. So a lot of animals use the star compass to navigate. And of course, sea turtles need to lay their eggs on our local beaches and beaches around the globe. And if there's a lot of light in the inshore environments, they can't navigate properly to lay their eggs. And then on the other side of things, unfortunately, the little younglings, when they go back into the ocean, if there's a lot of light, they can't find their path. And this is a new story, and these pop up occasionally. This is from 2019, where some sea turtles actually moved not towards the ocean as they were supposed to, but they made their way towards a hotel swimming pool. So this is really, really bad for reproduction for a lot of different organisms. All right, I know what we're all interested in are birds. So let's talk about birds and how light pollution affects them. So first, we've got to talk about lack of sleep. I don't know about you guys, but I'm one of those folks that everything's got to be super dark or I can't sleep right. And if you think about it, it's probably the same way with animals, right? If it's a lot of light out there, it's going to be hard for them to sleep and to get quality sleep. And we all know if you don't sleep, you don't feel right, you don't do things right. So first, a lab study, and this was with pigeons. And this was in the lab, so this wasn't out in the wild. And we've got a couple lines here. So this dark line here, this is just kind of dark conditions. So we're not adding any artificial light whatsoever. And this little dotted line and the open circles is when we add artificial light. And then this scattered line here, this little dashed line here, this is their recovery. So after they've been exposed to light. And they looked at both REM and non-REM sleep. So over here on this side, this is the non-REM sleep. And you can see when there's light around, they get a lot less of it. And what's really kind of interesting, or what I thought was cool about this, is that their REM sleep, once again, they get less REM sleep. But when they recover, once that light's been taken away, they have to kind of make up for it and they get more REM sleep. Studies have been done in the wild. So this is over in Europe. These are great tits. These are cavity nesting birds. And so the biologists were interested in seeing if, okay, you're in a cavity, maybe you're somewhat protected from the light if you're, cuddled up in there. Maybe light can't get to you, maybe it won't affect you. And they wisely looked at differences between males and females. And you can see that here, the females, the light seemed to affect them much more than it did the males. I don't have a figure from this paper, but wanted to talk with you guys about it a little bit. Zebra finches have long been used as a model system for studying song learning and vocalization in birds, and not just birds, but really all organisms. And studies have shown that light pollution can change these higher vocal centers in these birds that are important in song learning and the production of song. And interestingly, just like in the previous study, how there were differences between males and females, and how there seems to be less of an effect on males than females, studies with zebra finches are kind of showing the same thing, which in a way might be kind of positive, that maybe light pollution isn't affecting these males as much as it possibly could. But of course, if it's affecting females, then it might affect their egg-laying behavior. Like everything in life, if it was just light pollution, things would suck enough, but there's tons of other things that bother birds out there. And this paper looked at the effects of not only light pollution, but also noise pollution, and kind of how both of those things together can make things worse. And several papers have done this, and most of the papers find that light pollution alone is very bad. Adding the noise pollution makes it a little bit worse, but light pollution is extremely bad. And so they looked, once again, this is a European study. They looked at great tits. They looked at two environments, a forested environment and an urban environment. They had a control, one where there was noise, one where there was light, and then looking at areas where there was both light and noise pollution. And it changed their overall activity, especially at night. And as you can see, it's primarily this light, but the light and the noise kind of increased it a little bit. Had to throw the robin in here because I love the robin. All you guys, you all live in Jacksonville. I'm sure there's street lamps outside your window somewhere. And I'm sure in the spring, or even now, as mockingbirds are setting up their winter territories, you hear the birds out there singing, and it's still pitch black. This has been documented in numerous bird species that the onset of dawn chorus is getting much, much earlier in the day. And that's because of all this light pollution. There's light out there, it triggers the birds, and they start singing really, really early in the morning. Interestingly, you don't see the same effects in all bird species. So it's important to realize when we talk about light pollution or anything, there can be differences between males and females, and there can also be differences between different species of birds. This study, once again, a European study, and they looked at dawn chorus in different birds. So the black dots here are birds that are away from artificial light, so away from street lamps specifically. And then we've got those that are near street lamps. And you see that some birds are not affected as much as other birds. So chaffinches not bothered as much, but you've got the European robin and then the European blackbird that are affected more by these lights, and it changes their song behavior. Light pollution may be good, You always have to look for the silver linings. And one silver lining, this is a study from last year, showed that artificial light is causing some birds to nest earlier. And this might help to counteract some of the effects of climate change. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of this mismatch hypothesis, that because of climate change, when food is available, specifically when caterpillars are available, it's much earlier in the season than it used to be. And when birds come and they migrate, and they lay their eggs, and those eggs hatch, well, the caterpillars have already come and gone. So artificial light might be pushing these birds back to nest earlier. So they might be more in sync with the caterpillars that got out of place because of climate change. So maybe some light pollution might be good in some ways, a positive spin on it. Now for the bad stuff. This is a beautiful graphic from this paper by Cabrera Cruz from several years back. And they wanted to look at major migratory pathways around the globe. And they wanted to look at light intensity in these different areas. And they found that for many of the major migratory pathways that birds use, they are affected heavily by light pollution. And of course, you can see here in the Americas, it's especially so. So the darker these white lines are, the greater the intensity of light pollution as birds fly through these areas. A paper was done where they wanted to look at the biggest urban areas across the US, and they wanted to see how this light intensity might affect migratory behavior just in the US. And this study is really kind of interesting by Horton because they found that light intensity is differential depending on which coast you're on. So on the East Coast, light exposure seems to be a greater problem during fall migration, which we're currently under. But if you're on the West Coast, light tends to be more of a problem during spring migration. So here's just a paper or a figure from their paper showing you kind of the rank of all these major cities and how intense light is and the effects of light pollution. And it does tend to be worse in fall and worse on the East Coast than in the West Coast. And you can see Chicago here is a big, big culprit. Let's not forget another big city, New York. We just had 9/11 not too long ago. And of course, they always have the 9/11 memorial lights that go up. And every single year you see on countless news outlets pictures of birds that have died because they get drawn in to these lights. Here's a paper by Van Doorn, and it's an interesting paper and it's a very sad paper. Basically, they want to quantify the effects of these bright lights on migrating birds. So here, this is basically the number of birds within a half kilometer when those lights are turned off, about 500 birds. When they're turned on, it's almost 16,000 birds. So an incredible number of birds are drawn in and are trapped. And so here's the actual paper and another figure from the paper, just showing you that the number of birds is much greater. You're getting slower rates of birds, so they're moving much slower, and they're calling a lot more. So these lights really distract and disorient the birds and often will lead to the death of the birds, unfortunately. So now we've got to talk about some dead birds and birds impacting buildings. And I won't take too much of Mike's turn here. So just a little bit of information. It's estimated that maybe 1 billion birds are killed each and every single year from lights. That would be at the utmost range. So it ranges anywhere from 97 million up to 1 billion birds. 50% to 3/4 of the birds that hit a building are probably going to die from that. As you notice, cats are the second cause of death for birds. And even some of these birds, if they're just hit and they're stunned, unfortunately, feral cats will come and drag them away. So it's really dangerous to be a bird where you've got these highly reflective glass surfaces. And light, of course, can increase this reflectivity. This is a study from South America, and this was a citizen science project. So they asked folks in the community to gather data, and they quantified the number of collisions on big buildings, so greater than 3 stories, and then like residential, so just a couple story buildings. And as you can see, the percent of collisions differs by type of bird that you're seeing. So a lot of the songbirds, the perching birds, the passerines, these are the ones that are heavily impacted. And even though we focus a lot of times on these big, tall buildings in downtown areas, residential areas can also have a high number of impact. It's not just these tall buildings. Let's talk a little bit about tall buildings. This is a recent study by Lau et al. And this was in Minneapolis. So they wanted to look at several buildings around Minneapolis, and they want to quantify, well, what's causing birds to hit these different areas? Is it the amount of glass? Is it vegetation? What's going on? And they point out that it's not just at night. Remember, the sun beating down on glass can polarize this light and can change the view of that glass surface for birds and other animals. So here's a picture of Minneapolis during the daytime, and you can see all these reflective surface in all these big buildings. So what did they find? The more glass you have, the more collisions they found. They did find a correlation between the amount of lit area in these buildings, but it's not as great as just the amount of area that you have. And another factor that's really important, and this isn't the only study that has found it, it also matters how much vegetation you have near those buildings. So glass surface matters, lighting matters, but vegetation also matters as well. Oh, it's so depressing sometimes talking about birds. I wish I could talk about something happier with you guys. You all probably saw this paper a couple years back, right? We've lost over 3 billion birds. Birds are declining for a number of reasons. And impacts with buildings is just one more reason, and light pollution is just one more reason that we're losing birds. So we want to stop this. And we are so lucky that here in Jacksonville, we've got the Jacksonville Zoo and the Duval Audubon, as well as St. John's Audubon, trying to do something about it. So Mike, I can't wait to hear what you have to say, what you guys are doing to save the birds.
Thanks, Dr. Vanderhoff. Hopefully we can, let me see if I can get sharing my screen. Share, oh, there it is. I think this is it. You see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, so yes, Dr. Vanderhoff did very well with all that information, some of which was new to me. I will have to get with you about at least one of your sources. So as Carolyn and Dr. Vanderhoff mentioned, Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens and St. Johns County Audubon and you guys, Duval County Audubon, got together and started last year. I think we started talking last spring or summer, and we had a couple people do some scouting as to buildings and so forth and so on, but we didn't really start doing any surveys and such until this past spring. So as Dr. Vanderhoff mentioned, we are on the Atlantic Flyway. Billions of birds migrate every year. So that's a large number of birds that come through our area. So of the birds that you see out and about, you got basically four types of birds. You got your year-round birds, cardinals, mockingbirds that are found here. Then the ones that come to Jax for the winter, your yellow rump warblers or your butterbutts, your black and white warblers, then your American redstarts, they just fly through. You see them in spring and fall. And then those that come up here, that winter down in South America and come up here to breed, are the swallow-tailed kites. So there's a lot of different areas you can get information on that will tell you about birds. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology is a great one. American Bird Conservancy is a good one. And then there's other apps that you can use that'll help with birds information and whatnot. Cornell has this really neat website that's called Birdcast. And the brighter the color, as you can see in here, is that's the higher the number of birds. So this is from September of this year. I mean, this year, just the beginning of September. And then here's one from last year, October. So this is during peak migration, like we're in now. And there's a lot of birds coming through Jacksonville on that night. And I think they changed this maybe hourly. So it's pretty up-to-date information. So as I said, there's a lot of birds that fly through here, and most of them are migrating at night, especially the songbirds. I think one statistic said about 80% of the songbirds migrate at night. And they use the stars, the moon, different things to navigate by. So lights in cities definitely have an effect. So National Audubon Society started a Lights Out program 30 or 40 years ago. I'm not sure of the exact date. And it has grown, as you can see here. These are Lights Out programs all over the states. And we have we've heard possibilities of at least 2 or 3 more in Jacksonville, hopefully starting up within the next year. Not Jacksonville, Florida, that will be starting up within the next, hopefully within the next year or 2. So as I said, we started this initiative, and you can, on this map, you can see the bright little light in the corner of Florida, where Jacksonville is. So the birds are coming up the coast or going down the coast, depending on which migration it is. And they're hitting that bright little spot and running into trouble. So as a Lights Out program, one of the first things we try to do is collect data. We need that data to be able to say, look, we do have a problem. Birds are dying or being injured. So what we did last fall, we got volunteers to help us. And this map on the upper left is an example of one of our routes. It's kind of hard to see, but there's blue numbers on the buildings. And the volunteers will go walk these. In the spring, we did 3 days. We have 4 different routes, and we did 3 days a week. This year, this migration, fall migration, we're doing 4 days at least, if not more. And then we have down here on the bottom, that's just a written version of the map so that you can easily tell where you are and where you need to go next. The routes are fairly easy. Some of them, I should say easy to learn, but it's still about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on how many birds you find. And then over here on the right, we have a list of the birds we were finding last migration. So some of the things that we have our volunteer looking for are the birds. As you can see, one's collected here on the right. The volunteers will fill out the form, and they will also go to website that we have available to them to register or to enter their data into our registry. And I take that information and the information I get from the carcasses, I put it all together and make that master list basically of birds. Last spring, we found about 70 birds, but we're already above that number. This fall migration is really bad. And I'm not sure if that's kind of what Dr. Vanderhoff was saying about it's worse on the East Coast in the fall, or it might also have something to do with we're doing more surveys. But the number of birds found on each survey is considerably more than found in the spring. So I suspect it is because it is a fall migration. We plan on doing this for many years. So we'll be able to see if the numbers continue to run very similar. But we're hoping to have a chance to make a difference. So these are some of the birds that we've found. In the spring, ovenbird was the most numerous of the list of 70 birds. I think 2/3 of them were ovenbirds. On the fall migration so far, common yellowthroat is our largest number of casualties. As you can see, the male here, the beautiful male, but most of them, what we're seeing, look like the female because of the confusing fall warbler, and they basically have their duller colors. They don't have their bright breeding colors on. So we also collaborate with the Florida Museum at University of Florida. And these are a couple pictures that they did of the birds we collected in the spring. This is not all the birds, but they did, since we had so many ovenbirds. You can see the picture on the left is all ovenbirds, and that's not all of them. But on the right, you can see we had some beautiful birds that were found, unfortunately. And I really am not looking forward to seeing their pictures from this fall migration when it's all said and done. It's going to be much worse. So here's a picture similar to Dr. Vanderhoff's. And the question, do we really need all that light? Basically, it just needs to be turned down or diminished during the peak migration times, which is 11 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 or 6, depending on who you're talking to. And it's just during the basically 4 or 5 months of migration if you put both the spring and the fall migrations together. So what can you do? There's the data collection. You can volunteer with us. Maybe next spring, we've got it filled for this fall migration. So we're pretty good on volunteers. And then, or for your own home, you can make sure your lights are off during those times, or you draw your blinds. Any of your outdoor lights, try to point them downward, as Dr. Vanderhoff's little display showed, that the better lights are directed downward. And it's good, like she said, not just for birds to have it that way, but for a lot of other animals. Maybe not including the insects, but or some of the other animals there. But if you can switch out your floodlights to timed lights or sensor lights, it greatly reduces that problem too. If you have businesses that you know that you frequent, or you have a connection with somebody that manages a building or something, try to convince them to turn off their lights during the 11 to 5 period in the spring or in the fall. And feel free to share our graphics and messages to your friends and families. And I wanted to go on to something else a little bit above and beyond lights out. I'm hoping we'll get some questions for any of you that have more interest in what we're doing with lights out. But as you can see here, I'm going to suggest some other things that we can do that'll help birds from hitting windows. And this, I don't know if I can, I'm hoping I can get this to go. This is, sorry, it's spraying. This is the way I got it. This guy is cleaning his window. And you'll see that it's not just birds that can't see glass. It's people also. This is. I'm not sure what this store is or restaurant, but I see they try to stop them, but people still walk into the window. I think after this, they actually put something on the windows so that people didn't continue doing this. I mean, it's not really funny because you imagine when a bird hits a window, they're flying and they're going a lot faster.
Is the Pizza Boys landmark.
Yeah. So basically, as you can see in this picture, it's almost real to us. To birds, reflections are real. So either like one of the graphics that Dr. Vanderhoff had, where the sky is reflecting off from the windows, the birds are looking up and they see sky, so they're going to fly. They're flying up to the sky, and they just meet the window. Or in this instance, they have trees in the background, and they just think they're flying through more trees and run right into the window. And so one of the things that American Bird Conservancy figured out through studies and experiments, that the birds, especially the small birds, who are the most apt to run into your windows, there's a rule of thumb that they've developed, a 2x4 rule. Whereas if you install lines that the birds can see, if they're horizontal, they need to be 2 inches apart. If they're vertical, they need to be at least 4 inches apart, or less. That works for any kind of window treatment, whether it be spots or stripes or designs. You can even do the old-fashioned silhouettes. The problem there is you have to put silhouettes so close together, remembering the 4x2 rule, that it's really hard to see out, and it's not worth doing. But these other options, I see there's 2 pictures of the same picture, are definitely better. And then here's something that I'm doing at my house. They're called Acopian, I think I'm pronouncing that right, bird savers, or Zen window curtains. It's basically just paracord. I've got shoelaces made out of it. It's very durable, and you just string them, hang them from your windows, tie a knot in the bottom. They don't even have to actually go all the way to the bottom. 4 inches apart. They flow with the wind. They very little obstruction to your view. But I'm sure most people have heard the thump of a window of a bird hitting your window. Either they flew off or they died. Sometimes a stunned bird will get caught by cats. It's just it's a sad thing to happen. So I'm going to go back to a couple things, even though this is the end of the slideshow. There's a couple things that need to be re-mentioned. When we first picked out our buildings, sorry, wait a minute, what was that? Sorry about that. We just got some birds from Chicago, and the keepers need some guidance. Sorry. One of them is refusing to come out of the crate. So I just had them leave the crate there. So when we were first looking at buildings, we were advised to look for buildings with, as the study that Dr. Vanderhoff pointed out, with a lot of glass and green space. So the theory is green space contributes to window strikes, because, especially with lights out, because when they're flying over and they get caught in this light trap, they fly around, they're confused by all this light that's coming up from the ground, and they either get tired, well, mostly they're probably getting tired. Sometimes they'll fly into a building because they just are confused and tired and wore out, and they're also using up energy they need to continue their migration. So they come down to this green space that Jacksonville's great. I mean, you go into downtown and there's trees, there's bushes. It's really nice for us to see that. Unfortunately, it's contributes to the death of birds because of the lights. I mean, the trees and such are not the problem, but they just contribute to it, because the birds come down, they come to the trees to rest, to forage, and then when they go to leave, they just think they're seeing sky, and they hit the buildings and either die or stunned or injured. So one of the things we're trying to do is, once we get all this information from this fall migration together, we will be approaching business owners, building managements, and we'll be discussing options, possibilities, and pointing out that they can save thousands of dollars a year by cutting out their lights just on electric bill, in hopes that they will join us in helping save birds by cutting down on lights. There's another thing too that I just got today. Let's see if I can find it. It's let's see, was it? No, that's not it. So I must have closed it. I thought I had it open. Pittsburgh has, get off my screen. Where are you? Pittsburgh has just signed legislation to adopt night sky parameters for any new building, any street lights. It's really a great step forward. Night Sky, if you don't know, is an organization similar to National Audubon Society, but their focus is on light pollution, reducing it. So they've come up with parameters, and their parameters are stricter than ours as far as lights out initiatives. So if Pittsburgh can do it, I'm hoping that we can get Jacksonville to do it. It might be slow. The results might be slow because it only pertains to new or renovated buildings or lights and such. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a wonderful introduction to our Lights Out program. And of course, you know, I'm a volunteer too. So I almost got tears in my eyes. And when you were showing the photos of the birds that we found last spring, those photos really hit me in the gut when I saw them. And you're right, the fall migration photos are going to be even more powerful, because I have already found almost the same number of birds so far, and we're only halfway through, that I did the entire spring. So it's kind of overwhelming. Dr. Vanderhoff, thank you so much for presenting all that information. That was very interesting, you know, and kind of powerful to learn about the effects on not only the birds, but all the other kinds of wildlife as well. I mean, it has such far-reaching effects. Does anyone have any questions for either of our speakers? If you want to either go ahead and just unmute yourself, or you can post it in the chat. Either way is fine. I think we have a small enough group, it won't be a problem.
I wanted to give the current statistics.
Okay.
Right. Okay, last spring we did the same routes last spring as we're doing now. Last spring we ran the route 129 times, came up with 70 dead birds and roughly 30 stunned birds, injured birds. We are running the same routes. We have run them 89 times so far this year, this fall. And our total number of dead birds is 170. And the number of stunned we've seen is 27. So even though we have not done the route as many times yet as we did all last spring, we have seen 2.5 times as many birds. So that's where we stand right now. Fall is absolutely, definitely worse than spring.
And I had heard another theory also about why fall might be worse than spring, and it might be worth mentioning here. And I don't know, Dr. Vanderhoff, if you have any comments on this, but we had also heard that, yes, she's just agreeing with me. I'm sorry. She just posted something in the chat about what I'm about to say, that more of the birds who are traveling are actually juvenile or immature birds, and they don't have as much experience they don't have any experience, obviously, with brightly lit areas. So
this is one of the things that I was going to ask you about, Dr. Vanderhoff. Why is there a difference in West Coast then? Wouldn't that be the same?
Yeah, you would think. I don't know. I'd have to look at another paper too, because this was I'll send you the paper. I'll send you all the papers in my presentation so that you can,
yeah, that'd be great.
Can look over them. I think the East Coast has a higher volume of birds than the West Coast. So maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not positive. Mike, I do have a question for you and for everybody else working on this. In the spring, you all had ovenbird as being the #1 poor bird that was getting killed off. And last spring, I heard and saw more ovenbirds than I have ever heard or seen in Jacksonville. So
Wow.
I'm kind of curious, are you guys doing anything to, like, maybe looking at eBird data or something to see what influx of birds are coming through?
I don't think we have yet. Carol or Carolyn might have done that, but I haven't. But that's good to note, because we can look at next spring and see if the trend continues. But it could just be natural fluctuations in their populations, and they just happen to be, like you said, there should have to be more of them around. Unfortunately for them, at least the 50 or so that died.
We do have several questions that came in on the chat, so excuse me for a second. Had to clear my throat and I didn't want y'all to have to listen to it. So here's a question from Sarah. She says, we have a mockingbird that hits our window. I guess it's a small window that you're referring to, many times in the morning, and sometimes he even hits our car window. We feel bad for this bird. Can we do anything to make it stop?
That is, if I'm guessing, that's aggression.
Mm-hmm.
They see another mockingbird in the reflection and they're just attacking. Mm-hmm. That bird has less chance of really getting injured because he's not flying into it. He's flying, usually I've seen birds like that, they'll fly to the window ledge and then they'll fight. So there's no momentum between before they hit the actual window. It's just them pounding on the window, fighting the reflection. I've seen a cardinal that used to sit on a car mirror, and of course the car mirror is covered in poop, but the cardinal just kept going after the window. I'm guessing that's what that is. What do you think, Natasha?
Yeah, they're setting up, and right now the mockingbirds are setting up their winter territory. So I'm sure if they see another bird around, they're like, "Who the hell are you? Get out of my space!" I'm sure that's all it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything you can really do.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was interesting. I've seen that behavior in cardinals, but I didn't know mockingbirds did it as well. So I have a comment and a question from Eva. Thank you to both speakers. I learned several things I had not heard other speakers present. She does have a question. Please comment on lighting colors impacting birds and insects. Which colors are better or worse? And I don't know which of you has more expertise on this, so I'll let you all decide who answers that one.
Well, I don't know about colors themselves. I can guess it goes along with the light spectrum, but in white light, there's a color spectrum, even though you can't really see the color most of the time. So there's a spectrum of light from blue to red. They have found that the white light that's more to the blue spectrum affects birds more than it does to the red spectrum. So if you changed your lights to the red spectrum light, there's less chance, or theoretically, there's less chance that it will affect the birds.
Yeah, LED lights are really bad. And I think that's why some of the sulfur bulbs aren't as bad as LED, because if you look at those two lights, if you kind of sulfur bulbs are more yellowish and orangish in color, and LED are that crisp, kind of whitish, more towards the blue tone.
So Carolyn, and I guess everybody may have had a chance to read this already, but I'm going to go ahead and say it out loud. In the most recent Audubon magazine, Ken Kaufman also talks about the fact that fall routes and spring routes can vary greatly. So, and I know that's true, for example, blackpoll warblers. I think blackpoll warblers come through our area in the spring, but they do not come through our area in the fall. It's very unlikely to find a blackpoll warbler in our area during fall migration. So yeah, that may be the case. Brad and Eva both said they want to read that paper, but I apologize, I don't know which paper. It may have been one you were talking about, Dr. Vanderhoff.
I will send you a literature cited for the papers. or I can send you PDFs, copies of the papers. If anybody puts their information in the chat or which paper you're talking about, I can send it on to Carol and then forward it to everybody.
Sounds good. Pete is asking, and I'm not sure how much we can answer this question, but what routes or buildings are the main offenders?
I don't think we can safely answer that. There are quite a few that are bad offenders. And I think it's premature to call out names, which is kind of what that would be doing if we said that yet. We need to get more information to be accurate. That's kind of my response. I mean, Carol, you and Carolyn, you feel free to speak up if you feel differently.
No, I feel the same. I feel like, you know, especially in a public forum like we're in right now, you know, to call out a particular building manager would kind of be sort of adversarial in a way. And, you know, we want to approach this not as a finger pointing and you're bad, you know, you're doing bad things, or, you know, you've got to reform your bad ways. It's more of you know, just informing building managers and kind of making some suggestions about how they can help improve this situation, and not to, you know, I certainly don't want to put anybody on the spot. And I think you're right. You know, I don't think we haven't even been doing this for a whole year really. And so we don't have definitive information yet. So I would certainly agree with that. Carolyn, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
No, basically I agree. I don't think that we want to give out any names based on incomplete data.
And one of the things that we got information, sorry, Carolyn, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Sorry. One of the advices that we got from other lights out initiatives was to make positive relationships with these buildings managers or the building owners. They have found, others have found that they get a lot better result from developing good relationships and taking things slowly, trying to earn the trust, I guess you could say, or getting them on board and developing a community that everybody can say, oh, great, this building is participating, and so maybe we should visit that building or take our business there, kind of thing. Culture is what I was looking for, building a better culture so that everybody will want to get on board and hopefully turn out their lights or turn them down.
So Kim has asked if any of the building owners on our current routes, are they expecting to see our results? Have they been expressed any curiosity as to what we're finding? And just personally, I have not, you know, been approached by any building managers or building owners yet. I've spoken to a lot of security guards and maintenance people when I'm doing my route on Thursday mornings. But I don't know if we've been contacted by any building managers or anybody like that. Mike, has that and any of that happened yet?
No, it has not. But I do have a lead on one building. Well, I take it back. I guess the stadium, I've got a good connection at the stadium. So I'm hoping that will help out there. But the stadium's not been a big problem yet, so I'm not sure what we'll do there. Although Daly's place is a problem.
So I think it kind of remains to be seen. I think we're, you know, as we already said, we're sort of just still in the preliminary data collection stages, and I don't have definitive results yet to really share. So that, I guess, will be in the future. Anybody else have any other questions for either of our speakers this evening? Doesn't look like it. Well, thank you both so much for being here tonight and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. And I actually also learned some things that I did not know. So I really appreciate you being here. And thanks to everybody who came tonight. I'm going to go ahead and close and hope everyone has a wonderful, yes, Mike, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to let everybody know that Lights Out Northeast Florida wouldn't be where we are now without Carol and Carolyn. They have been a great help. They've done more than I've done. So I really appreciate them, and yeah, and all the volunteers that have been doing the routes. It's just been, yeah, it's been amazing how people have come on board. And thankfully, Carolyn's been around to manage the volunteers for us.
Yes, amen to that. 37 volunteers this fall, Carolyn said. That's incredible. Yes, and several of them are on this call. So thanks to all of you guys for doing it. All right, well, I think I will say goodnight then. And thank you again to everybody and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Bye.